Okay, I'm just going to wait a few moments for our attendees to start trickling in, but welcome everybody. I see a few people coming in. Okay, I'm going to slowly start. Hello everyone, my name is Chantel and welcome to this event with Valerie Chirard and Bobby Henley. We are here today to talk about Valerie's latest middle grade novel, A Bend in the Breeze. This is Valerie's 30th novel. Congratulations, Valerie. We are so excited to have published this book with you. And I'm just going to briefly explain what you can expect for the next hour. We are going to have a conversation between Valerie and Bobby, and we are also going to take times for questions in the latter half of today. If you have any questions for Valerie about this book or about maybe her writing process, anything that you can think of, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and Bobby will read your questions to Valerie later on. We also will have a giveaway portion. If you ask a question in the Q&A function below, you will be automatically entered into this giveaway, and we have a lot of amazing prizes. We have these really cute, I don't know if you can see them, but really cute beetle charms. And we also have really colorful sand. I can't be 100% certain. I can't guarantee that they are from Teje, but who knows, they could be. Just another look at them. And those are 3 prizes. So we have 3 chances of winning a prize today. First, I'm going to share our land acknowledgement before I pass things on to Barry, who is the editor and publisher of DCB. So Cormorant Books acknowledges the sacred land on which our company operates. It has been a site of human activity for many thousands of years, more than 15,000. This land is the territory of the Huron-Wendat and Petun First Nations, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. The territory was the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy and the Confederacy of the Ojibwe and allied nations to peaceably share and steward the resources around the Great Lakes. Today, Toronto, remains home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. We are grateful to have the opportunity to work in the community on this territory. And with that, I'm going to hand things over to Barry. Barry?
Hey, thanks, Chantel, and thank you to everyone who's joining us today for this launch, where we are celebrating a couple of huge achievements. First is that this is Valerie Chirard's 30th novel, which is a massive accomplishment. It makes me just tired just thinking about how much work goes into one novel, let alone 30. But the book itself, A Bend in the Breeze, is an achievement on its own. The world that Valerie creates for this book is one that a reader becomes deeply immersed in, and that alone makes you want to go back and reread the book so that you can live in that world again. There's also a great cast of characters and a compelling story, and it's all given to us in very richly written prose. I've worked with Valerie on many books over the years, and I sometimes think I know what to expect from one of her books, but this is another case, and there are many cases like this where my first thought when I read it was, wow, look what she's done here. She's one of the great writers in Kidlit and always makes people say, wow. And she's also one of the best people in Kidlit, which is all the more reason to want this book to be a hit. So from everyone at DCB, I want to congratulate Valerie on the incredible work she's done with A Bend in the Breeze, but also on her first 30 books. And we all look forward to the next 30 books that are going to make us say, wow. So now I'm going to turn things over to Bobby Henley, who in 2007 was awarded the prestigious Distinguished Service Award by the Ontario Library Association at that year's Super Conference. And Bobby has graciously agreed to join us today in conversation with Valerie Chirard about Valerie's middle grade novel, A Bend in the Breeze. So over to you, Bobby.
Thanks, Barry. Thank you and welcome, everyone. I'm excited to introduce our star, Valerie Chirard. Valerie, as was said earlier, has published over 30 books for young people just like you. She has won or been shortlisted for the Governor General's Award and the Canadian Children's Literature Award, just to name a few. And her books have been chosen as honor books for the wonderful Forest of Reading Awards. Some of her other well-known novels include Tumbleweed, Driftwood, and Birdspell. The book we're talking about today, Bend in the Breeze, is intriguing and kind of magical. The story begins with the main character, 11-year-old Pascal Chardon, drifting alone in a lifeboat onto a small unknown island of Taget. And she has no idea how she got there. The people who live on the island are very curious about her. Nobody has visited them ever, but they've all grown up hearing that a bend in the breeze will bring the long-awaited, a being who supposedly will determine the fate of all the people on the island. As days go by and strange events take place, Pascal starts to ask herself if she could really be the long-awaited and not even know it. All she wants is to be back home with her family, whom she misses so much. So, Valerie, can't wait to get started. First question. Well, it's kind of two questions. What inspired the idea for Bend in the Breeze? Or how did you come up with that marvelous title?
Oh, actually, that's an interesting pair of questions because the answer is actually in reverse.
Okay.
This was one of those cases like when you're writing, ideas can come along in any form. For me, very often it starts out with a character, but that wasn't the case for this story. And sometimes it's like a story idea, and that wasn't the case for this story. This story actually began with the title. It was just like I was, just pondering things, pretending to be working and running phrases and things through my mind. And this phrase popped in, a bend in the breeze. And I said, that needs to be a book title. So the story kind of came after the title. And the idea for the story, it just sort of naturally began to develop and evolve as time went by. So the idea didn't come first. The title came first, and the title sort of, I guess, inspired the storyline eventually. Yeah, it's been a slow project for me. Not one. Sometimes you just get an idea and characters, and it all comes together, and you have it written in 3-6 months, whatever. But this was a work in progress for a while.
I love the title. It conjures up all kinds of things and immediately captures your attention.
Yeah.
And I love the alliteration and the way it just rolls off the tongue. It's just so cool.
Yeah, and it's unusual for me to start with a title, but I think this isn't the first time it's happened. And actually, my book scheduled for next spring, I got the title for that first too. But the story concept was sort of came at the same time. But for A Bend in the Breeze, it was completely title first.
How interesting. The characters in this novel are so unique and interesting. I'd like you to talk about some of them and also talk about when you're done talking about the ones you want to, which of them do you relate to and why? It's going to be an interesting answer because they're interesting characters.
Yeah. I, like you, also think that the characters are just so captivating in this story. And I think like the reason that the characters are developed in the way they are is because that's a necessary part of serving the story. And I'm sure that you noticed in reading, this story is written in third person. And that's a very unusual voice for me to adopt, and a difficult one for me. I'm much more comfortable really writing in first person. And this story couldn't be told in first person because of the different happenings and what the main character could and couldn't know. So writing in third person, I think it sort of allowed me to develop characters in a richer way than I would have been able to if it was just, if we were only seeing them from the main character's perspective, so to speak. And they served the story in that they had to bring like sort of an understanding of how the island worked and how the people thought, how their systems were and everything. And I forget the other parts of the question, but
just which of them do you relate to and why? But before we
oh,
get to that, just I'd like you to talk about the elders. I'd like you to talk about
okay,
some of
yes,
the people that she become
yes.
friends of hers, the woman that she stays with, their last names, for example,
Oh,
how
yes,
neat
yes,
that
the
is.
names. When I wrote the story, I wanted to have like a wide ethnic mix, and I did the ethnic mix through the first names of the characters. But the last names, I wanted it to reflect the fact that this was a new beginning for all of these people, and that it was tied to a certain tranquility and earth and so forth. And so all of the last names, if you noticed, there's an element of water in them, and there's an element of something else like earth or animal or something like that. Like we have the first person that she encounters is Mrs. Riverstone, and we've got the Cloud Waters, and we've got Zerald Duckpuddle, who's like really, he doesn't appear a whole lot, but he's such a favorite character of mine, because of course Zerald is, he's the apprentice healer, and the regular healer's like off on maternity leave, so he's filling in. But the poor fellow's the hypochondriac. So everyone that, everything he comes in contact with, he's quite convinced, of his own illness. Anyway, like, yeah, it was so much fun to write that character and the scenes with him because of the humor involved there, and not
He was very funny.
Yeah, and not making fun of him. Like, you can feel for him, but also like he was a little over the top there with his, with the things that he thought. Yeah, so which characters did I relate to? Oh, you asked me to talk about the elders. Well, we have
yeah, I'd like you to talk about the elders. They were maybe because I'm an elder. I'd like to. They're very interesting.
I'll have you know, I'm also an elder. Yeah, the island has a sort of like, not exactly a government, but they have a system where the 3 oldest people on the island, whether they're men or women or a mix of both or whatever, that they're considered, because they're the eldest, that they must have acquired the most wisdom. So we have Elder Sun, Elder Moon, and Elder Star. And of these 3, actually, only Elder Sun is truly wise. And the other 2, they're more well-meaning than anything else. They want to do well, but they don't tend to offer the very best advice. Let's just put it that way. They don't have the depth to think things through and really, really give good counsel. But they're comical and they're lovable. And the fact that they're elderly and they're so respected, I really like that, because I think that's important, and it's not always the case, but in this culture, it does matter, like, that they're respected. And yeah, so the elders and the apprentice healer, like, those are the characters I think that add probably the most humor. There's always going to be humor in my stories because that's part of how I process life. But
I like the humor. I was very drawn to it. I was very drawn to those characters.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah,
I like
really
them
different.
so much. Yeah, and sometimes like it might look like I'm poking fun, but like I just really find them so adorable and endearing. Yeah, and you asked me who I relate to.
Do you relate to any of them in particular?
I might, if I had to. Ooh. If I had to admit the real truth, I probably, especially in my younger years, I probably am the most like Xander Thunderwave. He's the lookout, and he's not as vigilant and diligent as he should be, as we see through the story. And he tends to put things off, and he's a little lackadaisical in his work approach and stuff, and I have some of those tendencies. I have to really work at them to overcome them, because there's days I just would want to play Wordle all day. And I have to remind myself that there's an editor and publisher who might be waiting for some more work and appreciate it written. And I think I sort of relate a little bit to Mrs. Winter Creek too.
Okay.
So that's a peculiar combination, but Mrs. Winter Creek, she has gained some insights over the years, and I just like to believe that's also true for me. So that would, I think that would be
It's an interesting answer, because I thought you were going to say Pascal herself.
Oh no, I have no real connection, as far as seeing myself or any of her traits or anything like that. No.
Okay.
And I mean, I really love her little character. And I feel for her, but I don't necessarily feel connected to her in that way. Yeah.
Okay.
I thinking about it. Yeah, that when Xander popped right into my head, I said, I don't want to say Xander. Might as well, as my mother used to say.
Good to be honest. Good to be honest.
Yeah, that's right. My mom used to say, you might as well tell the truth as lie.
Yeah, because I think readers will relate to different characters. There's enough different characters in your novel that someone's going to relate to one of them in one way or another, or maybe many of them.
That's true. And often we're all composites of different personality traits and so on. So I think some traits are brought out more in different individuals in the story, like little Orally Ocean Song. She's so exuberant and bubbly and very chatty. I guess I should have mentioned her as sort of relating to her too. All my report cards through school mentioned something about a talkative girl.
And lo and behold, she shows up in the story.
She did show up, yeah. She plays a very interesting role in the story, Orally, because she's so young. She's just a little girl, and she's just going about her little girl life, and yet her presence is very impactful in a number of different ways.
Yeah, it is. It is. The characters are subtle in that way.
Yeah.
Next question, if you're ready for it.
Okay.
What part of the book was the most fun to write? And the reverse side of that, what was the hardest part to write?
Ooh.
Let's start with the fun, shall we?
All right. Well, I feel like I'm Zerald Duckpuddle's cheerleader here, but the scenes with him were just so much fun. I laugh like an idiot sometimes when I'm writing humor. It's ridiculous. I just find things so funny, and you ought not to laugh at your own jokes, but I do. And so the things that happen to Zerald that he brings about for himself, the scene where he's quite convinced, that he's a goner, and all of the laments and all of the different things that he does. They really are very fun to write. And the elders as well, anything that involves a little more humor. Those are for me the most enjoyable to write.
Okay.
And then the least enjoyable, did you say?
The hardest to write. What parts of the book were the most difficult to write? Did you get to a certain point and then you thought, okay, now what do I do with once Pascal lands on the island, and how does she navigate, and what do I bring in, and how do I develop the plot? Were there any sort of stumbles or hills to climb along that route?
I can't think of a place in this story where I reached that kind of impasse where you feel like, I don't know what to do next, or how to develop this from here. But I will say again, writing in third person is difficult for me. So that definitely was a challenge, because I find it hard to get the real true voice of the story as effectively in third person as first. And because I loved the story and everything that happened in it so much, I really wanted to achieve that. And I did my best. I hope I did well enough at it. But getting the voice just right from third person is definitely a challenge for me. Yeah.
That's interesting, because I've often read that first person narration is the most difficult for writers. So you're reversed that way.
Oh, well, that's really interesting to me, because to me, you get that emotional connection when you're speaking from the character's perspective. Maybe that's just my own connection to the story. I don't know, but
Yeah.
that's how it works for me. And then another thing, like, because this story, I wrote it, and the first draft is not, what you see today, but the earlier versions, it was like they needed more. They needed more happenings to really bring out the whole message of the story. And so going back and threading in people and events, that can be challenging to write. Not because it's so hard to do it, but it's so hard to make sure that it's not contradicting anything else that you've written, because it's hard to remember all the little details of all the everything. So
Right. It would be constantly going back to read
the checking and double checking and all of that. So those would probably be the challenges that I mostly face.
And to stay true to your message, the message that you wanted to get across.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yes.
I was going to ask you what came first, the plot or the character, but I kind of feel like they dovetailed all the way through. Can you comment on that?
Yeah. Well, as I said, like, what came first was the title. And then
besides the
then
title,
the plot. I would say in this case, and probably this is probably true anytime working that's not in first person. First person, I'll get like a just real general idea and go through. But with this, I had to sort of do more planning as far as like what will happen and what will happen next, and how the different characters will be woven into the story and everything. So what did you ask?
Which came I think I asked what came to you first, the plot or the characters. So it sounds like the plot.
Yeah, the plot, the basic plot, and I guess like then the characters, but some of the characters were woven in later, so some of the plot changed later.
Sure.
It was like it really was like quite a process to get this story out. It was unusual for me to take this long to write something.
No, it really paid off. It's a fabulous book.
Okay.
I know there's already a number of questions, so I'm going to ask one last one and see you think of this. So when I was reading Ben and the Breeze, I couldn't help but think about the pandemic. And I don't really want to dwell on it, but obviously the world we live in now is still a bit different than it was. I mean, it has been for the last few years. Things change for all of us in a big way, especially students, you not going to school, and the way of learning and just everything. And I know Pascal obviously experienced things that changed her life in a big way. Was this similarity in your mind when you were writing it at all, or was that just coincidental? Because it was it struck me.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no. In fact, like I started writing "Abandon in the Breeze" long before there was a pandemic, and the earlier drafts, were well finished, and the story was still in development, and back and forth. I would let it rest for a while. I'd work on other things. I'd go back to it and so forth. But like this book, I actually don't know what year I started writing it, but it was a long process, and like I say, it wasn't intended to relate to the pandemic or to experiences. I do think that there are relatable things, but I also think that there's a lot of things that Pascal experienced in the story that are kind of universal, pandemic aside. Like, we've all had times that we feel maybe isolated, or that we've been fearful, like what's going to happen down the road. Many people, myself included, growing up especially, we've experienced that, finding yourself like in a move or whatever, like living among strangers.
You grew up as an armed forces child as well. So did I, and moved every 3 or 4 years,
usually every 4 years or so. Yeah. So
yes.
So there was the constantly, finding yourself plunked down among strangers.
I can relate.
It wasn't always in a new culture, but sometimes it was in a new culture. And I know, like, Canada, like there are many people who here who have found themselves in a different culture, you know, and you have to adapt and you have to get to know people.
Absolutely.
So some of those things I think are just like part of life in the
Life. Yeah.
what century are 22nd? Are we in the 22nd century?
21st century. Are we still?
Yes. I get.
So you were born in Moose Jaw,
I was,
Saskatchewan,
yeah.
and
Yeah.
then now you live in the Miramichi in New Brunswick.
I do. My dad is from here. This is his home. Well, was his home. Yeah.
And I think we have students here today from across Canada.
That's lovely.
Yeah,
That's
that's neat.
fantastic.
Yeah, it's neat that we touched upon that. Do you have time? Is there anything else you want to say about the book before you read us a passage? Because I think the
I'm gonna
students will be
read.
very
Yeah.
interested.
I forgot about the reading. I'm I'm so scattered sometimes. I don't think so. Like you've asked some good questions on my. I don't want to say too much more in case students have questions that would bring out some aspect that I might touch on. So I'll just go ahead.
Okay.
Here's the lovely cover. The lovely cover that you see is the work of an artist named Emily Whedon, who did just a beautiful job on this. So now, this little passage takes place when Pascal she's staying with an older woman who happens to be blind, and some peculiar things are beginning to happen. And she's asked, there's the expectation for her to say whether or not she's the long awaited. And initially she thinks, oh, that's silly and I couldn't be. And, she can't really answer the question. But in this scene, she's beginning to look at the question a little bit more seriously. So that night, as Pascal lay in her bed, she thought about the events of the day. In particular, her mind dwelt on two things, the butterflies and the peculiar indentation in the water. She had doubted the story when it was only Xander who claimed to have seen it, but Aurélie's account had convinced her that it was true. And this made Pascal wonder. If there had truly been an indentation in the water, what did that say about the boat that brought her here? There must have been something mystical about it if its place had remained marked after it was no longer there. This led her to another thought, and then another. If there was something strange and special about the boat, it stood to reason there must also be something strange and special about its passenger. Is it possible, Pascal said softly there in the dark, could I be the long-awaited? Normally, she would have thought such a question silly. Surely she knew who she was. But things had been so very strange these past weeks. It had started with that peculiar storm bursting out of a cloudless sky, tossing the great ship she was aboard about as though it were nothing more than a twig. And then she had woken in a lifeboat with no memory of how she'd gotten there and drifted to this place where even more curious things had happened. But if I am the long-awaited, she whispered, should I not feel differently or have some sort of secret power? Feeling rather foolish, even though there was no one there to witness her actions, Pascal lifted a hand and waved it in what seemed a magical sort of gesture. Abracadabra, she said in a hushed voice. Nothing happened. But it occurred to her perhaps she needed her own magic word, not a second-hand one. She thought very hard. Rumble-dum, ruble-zoo-za, she ventured at last. Again, nothing. Even so, Pascal felt certain there were things happening that she did not understand and yet was a part of. What it all meant and whether she would ever leave this place remained to be seen. And most mysterious of all was the idea that she might, just might, be the long-awaited. It felt very much as though the world had been turned upside down. Pascal wondered how she could be sure of anything anymore. So that's a little excerpt from A Bend in the Breeze.
Oh, that was a good one. That was very intriguing.
Thank you.
Okay. Is there anything else you want to say before we go to the questions from the students, Valerie?
I just want to say, I hope I know the answers, because that's not
You
always,
do. You
that's
do.
not always the case.
It's interesting that one of the first questions was from Carolyn, and she asked if Pascal portrayed any of your own experiences, feelings of feeling being in a strange place, and and that was an early question that came in, and we've answered that, I think, which is kind of neat that she's on that wavelength. Thank you, Carolyn. Matab asks, do you tend to fill up character sheets to flesh them out before you start the story, or do they evolve organically as you write the story? Just curious. That's interesting.
That is interesting. And Matab, being a famous author herself, if I was going to guess her method, I'd say character sheet. I don't use character sheets. I do, though, have I have a board here, like a blackboard type of thing where I pin notes to. And so if there are things that are important that I don't want to forget about a character, like a trait or something that's going to happen with them, I'll make a note and put it there. But other than that, yeah, it's pretty much organic. The characters develop. I usually have a fairly firm sense of them at the beginning, like what their role is in the story and what their boundaries are, if you will, like things that they'll do and things that they won't do, because it irritates me in a story if a character does something that's out of character for them. So I try to be careful about that, but other than that, I don't like make character outlines or resumes or any of those things.
It's interesting how different authors have different approaches to the writing process. Here, Naomi has a good question. Why did you, well, they're all good, but why did you introduce Inch, the beetle, into the story? Was it for companionship or to bring insects into the story along with the land and the people?
Well, I didn't actually introduce Inch. Inch just showed up. See, when she was in the boat, and she was so alone in that boat, drifting on the sea for days. And after a day or two, she said, like, she realized she wasn't alone. And there was this beetle on the boat with her. And so because he was her companion there, she adopted him. And he was like her pet, so to speak, her little friend. And the islanders found that very peculiar, which was kind of a fun part of the story, that here she is, they live on an island and bugs are not their friends. They probably have like a constant battle with, keeping them out of their food and out of their, beds and homes and stuff. And here's this girl that comes along, and I think maybe it adds to the mystique of who she is to them too, like that she's has this odd little, pet that lives in her hair, no less. I don't know, did I answer that question?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, a few more, and then we're going to get on to the process of writing, because some of the questions are about that. But a few more about the book itself. What makes this book different from your other ones? Interesting.
Yeah. Well, there's a hint of magical realism in this story, which is not something that I typically do. I did it to like a much lesser extent in my earlier book called Driftwood. But in this story, like, it's really, there's mystery and sort of a little hint of magical throughout the whole thing. So it kind of keeps you guessing, I guess, in a different way than a story told in the present or even a historical story would tell. Okay.
All right. And from Heather, when did you write your first book? And why did you, I'm blending two questions together, and why did you decide to become a writer?
I decided to become a writer when I was in the 6th grade in Lara, West Germany, and my homeroom teacher told me that I could be a writer someday. He had some little writing assignment that I had done in his hand, and he leaned down to my desk and he told me that. And that was the first time in my life that anyone ever told me I was good at something. It really had a huge impact on me, and he encouraged me throughout the whole year. So by the end of the 6th grade, like, I believed that there was something that I could do well, and I made my mind up, someday I'm going to write a book.
That's
And
wonderful.
it was kind of like quite a while later, because I was 40-ish when my first book was published.
Wow. Yeah, it's a long process.
Yeah,
Really,
but
it
that was
starts.
what made me decide,
Yeah,
it was
interesting.
a teacher's encouragement. There was
Okay.
another part to that question?
Yes, there was. Sorry. No, when did you decide to become a writer? When did you write your first book? So
Oh,
you've
when did I
answered
write?
it.
Yeah, I think I
Yeah.
got them both. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you did. And Randall also asked a very similar question, which I think you've answered. What inspired you to become an author? So it's
Okay.
nice that it was a teacher too.
It was. Yeah. Al
Okay.
Flower was his name.
What was his name?
Al Flower.
Okay.
When my first book was going to be published, I found him. I did a search. At that time, it was Canada 411. I sent letters by snail mail to all the A-lowers in Canada.
Oh, good for
And
you.
a week later, I got an email from him. We were in touch for that time until he passed away a few years ago.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
very touching. Mikhail asks, is the island based on a real place? And if so, have you been there?
I have not personally been to Dejay, and I can't say for sure if it's real, but I mean, there's those bottles of sand that Chantal has that she's going to give away later. So, and we don't know where that sand came. I really can't say. I just don't know.
Okay.
It may be real, and it might not be. But I just can't give you a definitive answer on that. I'm sorry.
That's fine. So questions from Miss Darian's grade 5 class. 2 of them you've already answered, but the third one, what was the title of your first book?
My first published book was called Out of the Ashes, and Barry Jowett was my editor on that story as well. It wasn't the first book I sent to him, but it was the first one that was signed for publication. The first book I sent him was called Kate, and that was ultimately published a year or 2 later as well. So yeah, I've been working with Barry for a long time, off and on.
Okay. Of all of the books, what is your favorite one that you've written?
Oh my goodness.
Do you have a favorite?
Right now, I have to say it's Abandon the Breeze.
Oh,
But
good.
there are books. I mean, there are books that I've written that I like more than others. The Glory Wind, Birdspell.
I was going to say Birdspell.
Birdspell really, like, when I started writing that book, I had no idea how deeply it was going to affect me in the writing. Like that was a real emotional experience writing that story. Rain Shadow, Driftwood, which, as I mentioned earlier, has a little bit of sort of magical content to it. And it's, I think, like there are folk tales in there interspersed. And I think it's like one of my strongest stories as well.
Driftwood.
Yeah. So yeah. I would say those would be the top ones, but I really, there aren't any books that I've written that I don't like.
Oh, good.
It would be
that would be really
bad.
really weird.
Yeah. Don't get this one because it's
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so Randall's also asked, how many books have you written? I know you've published 30, but how many have you written, and how many do you have? This is my add on to Randall. How many do you have in the works right now?
I have a book that I've just contracted. It's going to come out next spring. I'm working on another novel right now. I'm working on a nonfiction with a co-writer. I have a number of picture books that just sit in the pit of doom because as much as I love writing picture books, I don't seem to be hitting just the right sweet spot for publishers at this point in time, but maybe someday.
Picture books for children, toddlers sort of thing?
No, I'd say a little older, first grade, kindergarten, first grade.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, there are always things in the work, and there are always ideas being developed as well. there's nothing, and I don't know, I'm sure other writers will agree with this, there's nothing that's more likely to give you an idea for a great story as when you're slaving away on a story that, you know, is giving you a little trouble to write. All of a sudden, inspiration to write something else will hit, and you have to resist that because, you know, you've got the job to do at the moment.
But you must take side notes.
I
for
do
future.
sometimes, if I'm pretty sure it can be developed into something, because lots of times you get ideas and they're like fantastic. You know, I want to send my editor a note and say, oh my gosh, I'm going to write this. And then like 3 days later, you're like, well, that's garbage. So, yeah.
So that begs the question, when you wrote this novel, did it spark any future ideas for other novels that you may write, like may tie in somehow, or any of the characters going to show up again?
I'm going to say no to that, but I
Okay.
also said no when I was asked that question after The Glory Wind was out. And it turned out that I did have another story, and it was a very compelling story, and that was Rain Shadow.
Okay.
And I think in some ways Rain Shadow is a better story than The Glory Wind. But when I wrote The Glory Wind, it was standalone, and there was no way, you know, that I planned to write anything further.
Interesting how that happens. So they sort of take on a life of their own, I think.
Yeah, they can.
Yeah. Which of your books took the longest to write, and why? This is
That
from
would be yes, and for the reasons
Heather
that I
Terry.
talked about earlier, really. Yeah.
Okay.
So the
Yeah,
process
okay.
and developing. Yeah.
And another question from Heather Terrian. I guess it's Ms. Terrian. Sorry if I'm saying that wrong. Have your friends or family members given you ideas for your stories? Interesting.
Not for actual stories. I do sometimes get emails from strangers that tell me they have a great idea and that they're willing to share the glory if I write it for them, but I usually haven't been too interested in that. However, interestingly enough, in this book, Abandon the Breeze, my husband, who also is a children's author, it was his suggestion to have the indentation in the water where the boat had sat, but was no more. So that part of the story was like he contributed that idea. Yeah.
Oh, so that's
And
a
I
great
loved it.
question.
Yeah.
That's a good question from that class.
Yeah.
And
very
here's
good.
another one from the same class. Are your books different lengths, or are they all around about the same number of pages? That's interesting.
That's very interesting because, you know, in my earlier books, especially, I wrote to a word count. I was like, oh, I'll write a novel, it'll be about 45,000 words. And that was what I would do, and I would have it broken down by chapter. And I don't know, it was much more, I don't want to say formulatic because I wouldn't want to have to say that I wrote formulatic books, but they were much more confined by boundaries that I created. Now the story tends to be whatever word length it needs to be. So I have books that are shorter and books that are longer. I have a couple of high-low books. I have, you know, there's different lengths, and usually the middle grade are anywhere between like 30 and 42,000 words.
Okay, so there is a bit of a range there. Okay, interesting. And Randall, again, how did you come up with your own magic world? Was it easy? That's kind of.
I think the world just sort of took off on its own. When it started out, you know, there's this island, and this is how the people came to be there, and there's this legend, and here's this child that arrives, and they don't know if she's the person foretold in the legend or not, and she also doesn't know. And then strange things began to happen in the story, you know, with beginning with the indentation in the water, and then other things. I don't want to give too much of the story away.
No.
But other things that don't happen in our world, and yet they're not that odd. They're not like, you wouldn't say there's like an overwhelming magical sense, but there are.
But it's definitely there.
Yeah, it's
Definitely.
there. It's there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that kind of just developed on its own, like their customs and so forth were part of the world. And then this little bit of mystique was the other part. And that just kind of developed on its own. I really didn't sit down and chart out how the world would be. It just grew in the story.
Okay. From Carolyn, Rain Shadow is so different from A Bend in the Breeze. This is more of a comment, she says, than a question. Just loving your characters and stories. Can you comment on that? Rain Shadow being so different from Bend in the Breeze? Is there anything
Well,
you
when
would
she
like
says
to add?
loving your characters, like I don't know if I've written a character that I loved more than Bethany in Rain
Oh.
Shadow. maybe the main character in Birdspell.
Yeah.
Because I just felt like a real connection to him, but Bethany was just a character because she was so vulnerable. Yeah. Yeah, the characters, like I hope the characters are truly individual, because that's a very strong goal for me, not to have characters that, remind you of somebody else I wrote about already, type of thing.
Oh, good.
Because
Good
we're
that
all
you're
different.
aware of that. These are
Yeah,
great
we're all
questions.
different.
Yes, yes, yeah. Here's another question from Miss Terrian's class. I like this one. Have you ever written a book and did not want to publish it?
Well, I not at the time, but I have a couple of manuscripts that are sitting on my system. I can't quite get myself to delete them, though I probably should. But I have a couple of stories that I wrote, earlier in my career, and I maybe sent one or two places and they weren't picked up. And then I'd be busy writing something else. I'd sort of lose enthusiasm. And then I go back and look at them and think, oh,
Oh,
I don't want to see this in print. But sometimes you feel like,
fascinating.
sometimes you don't feel really enthusiastic about something that you've written. And a case in point would be the story that I wrote called Testify. And that's a high-low. And to Testify, I wasn't that keen. Like, I thought it was an okay story, but it wasn't a story that I thought, like, I'm really proud of this story, if you know the difference. Anyway,
Yeah.
that is the only one of my books that has sold translation rights. It was sold translated into French and also into Korean.
Oh,
It's
wow.
done quite well. Yeah, so like
Interesting.
somebody else liked it, even though I was, not as enthusiastic. When the translation rights started to sell, I began to like it more. But
Well, you might see it from a different perspective based on that. Like, wow,
Yeah.
that's interesting.
I guess I looked at it as like there's more here than I recognized when I first wrote it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a few more. Oh, we've covered most of them. This is from
Okay.
E-Train. I'm new to the conversation today, so I apologize if you've already spoken about Speechless, but I'm curious to know about this novel.
Speechless, yeah.
I
Speechless
like the book description very much. Is there anything you can share about it?
Yeah.
Speechless?
I really loved that story.
Okay.
The little guy in Speechless, it's this kid that he doesn't want to give a class speech, so he takes a fake vow of silence to support a cause that he doesn't really care about at all. It's just like an excuse. And then things happen. So like things happen unexpectedly in his world, as a result of the fact that he's not speaking. And then things happen within him as well, as a result of the fact that he finds like he's got to learn something about this fake cause that he's pretending to care about. It's not a fake cause, sorry. His interest is fake.
Yeah, right.
But things change throughout the story, like, yeah. And there's a lot of humor in that story. I loved that story. Yeah. So if you're wondering, should you read it? Absolutely, you should.
Good to know. Now, Randall also asks, and I know Bend in the Breeze came to you first, the title, and then you developed the story from that. But normally, is it hard for you to make up a title for a book? Do you sometimes write the whole book and then, and I'm adding this, Randall, I hope you don't mind. Do you sometimes write the whole book and then come up with the title? Or how difficult is it to write the title?
Yeah. I'm uncomfortable when I'm working on a story if I don't have a title that feels right to me. I have had one book published with a working title that I never came up with anything better. The publisher didn't come up with anything better, so we just ended up leaving it. I won't say which book it was, but it was an earlier story. But mostly, if I don't have a title at the start or fairly soon in the writing, I will often find one somewhere in the passage, like there'll be a phrase or a few words or something that will just jump out at me, and I think, oh, there's the title for the story, so that can happen too. And then sometimes, and because you'll never know which way it happens unless I actually tell you, sometimes I have the title fairly early and I'll work it into the passage somewhere into the text. So if you see
I
the
often
text there,
wondered if authors did that,
Yeah.
because a lot of the books I read, it's embedded in the dialogue or in the action.
Yeah. So sometimes it's embedded deliberately, and sometimes it's the title because it was there already and just sort of sprang out.
Okay.
Yeah.
One more question, and then I think we've covered them all. What was your most popular of all those 30 books that you've published? Which one has been the most popular?
Oh, something I don't know. Like for me to be able to say that with any certainty, I'd have to actually know the sales. And if you ever saw like the royalty statements, it's like a Philadelphia lawyer couldn't figure them out. So it's just like, I'm like, okay, did you send me a check? Good. But I think like it's possible it might have been my first book, Out of the Ashes. It did very well, and it was a mystery, but it's kind of like out of vogue now because it's not current, really. The characters and happenings aren't
and
current.
that can happen for sure.
It can happen. And other than that, like the Glory Wind did the best as far as achieving, winning awards and things like that. And Rain Shadow did very well with respect to awards and so on. And Bird Spell is just like, it seems like we just keep getting more and more news that it's been shortlisted for this or that. So
I know.
It remains, I'm just thrilled. I'm just thrilled. Like I had such an amazing editor, which you saw earlier with, Barry, like he just sees things and helps you bring things out. Like it makes such a huge difference. In a story. Yeah. And so like this really, like it remains to be seen with Birdspell, what it's going to do before it's finished. Oh,
I see great things for that book. I missed this one question from Emily. Sorry, Emily. What advice do you have for students who are interested in writing a book?
Read.
Oh.
Read. The more you read, the more you begin to understand about how stories are crafted, what works and what doesn't. Start paying attention, like really ask yourself, where does this not ring true? What makes me feel the most? And start paying attention to those things and those methods, and that you'll eventually incorporate all of that into your own work. And write, you should be writing, but you should be writing like as a practice. And not with any expectation or not with any sense of like, I must do this or I must achieve this. Just do it so that you learn how best to express the things that you want to express. And good luck.
Oh, wonderful answer. Okay, well, I think that's pretty much it. I don't see any more questions, and they've been just fabulous and detailed and covered so much ground. It's just so exciting. So I'm going to leave it up to you.
I think Chantel's going to come along now and do the draws and so forth. But Bobby, thank you so much. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Part of this today. It was wonderful. Thank you, Barry, for being here, and Chantel, of course. Chantel does the most amazing things behind the scenes. She's kind of like, she's her own little source of magic, to tell you the truth. So yes, and thank you everybody that joined us today. It means so much to me that you are here. So thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Valerie and Bobby. That was an amazing conversation, and I loved seeing all the questions that were coming in from the students and the other attendees. I'm just going to take the last few moments of today to announce the winners. I've put all the names through a randomized generator. So the 3 winners are Carolyn, I believe this is a teacher, so Wilker's class. The next winner is Mrs. Therian's 5th grade class. And the last winner is E-Train is the name on their Zoom webinar name. So if the 3 of you could reach out to me if possible, I believe I can also reach out to you I have your emails if you can't reach out to me, but I've just sent my email into the chat and we can set up for everyone to, the winners to get their prizes, the Beetle terms as well, and coloring pages. So thank you so much again for everyone. Oh, yes, Valerie.
I'm sorry, the coloring pages are available to everybody.
Yes.
So are you just going to send them out automatically, or?
Yes, so I cannot send them through our Eventbrite page, but anyone who would like the coloring pages as seen on the Eventbrite graphic, feel free to get in touch with me and I can send those out to anyone who is interested. So thank you again to everyone for attending today's event. The recording will be up on YouTube and everyone will receive an email about that so that you can rewatch it if you'd like. Thank you again, Valerie, Bobby, Barry, everyone, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you. And Chantel, can I read the things in chat before you close everything out?
I will send them to you, Valerie.
Okay, lovely. Thank you.
Okay.
I don't want to
Thank you very much for inviting
Thank you.
me.
Bye-bye.
Bye.